On March 7, 2025, about an hour before I was planning to lock up, a high-mileage SUV pulled into my bay, leaving two small dark spots on the concrete where it stopped. The owner climbed out holding a folded estimate the way people hold a bad medical result. He was not angry. He was tired. He told me his car had developed an oil leak. The idle had gone a little rough, and the shop had told him the valve cover gaskets were leaking. The rear main seal was starting to weep, and that with diagnostics and labor, he was looking at right around $400 to start, possibly far more once they got in there. Today, I am going to show you why that $400 quote was chasing a symptom, why the real culprit was a part that costs about $6, and why almost no shop and almost no owner ever bothers to check it. I have seen this exact scene more times than I can count. A driver walks in, convinced the engine is finally failing, because the car had been so reliable for so long that when it starts leaking oil or idling funny, the owner assumes something serious must have broken. They have read the forums. They have seen the words rear main seal and oil consumption and sludge, and they have braced themselves for a four-figure repair. That owner handed me his estimate, and I did not reach for a wrench. I did not order a single gasket. I reached up near the valve cover, pulled a small plastic valve about the size of my thumb, gave it a shake, and heard nothing. No rattle. It was stuck solid. I replaced it with one that cost less than a fast food lunch, cleaned up the residue, and sent him on his way. The leak stopped. The idle smoothed out. The rear main seal he was quoted to fix was never the problem. That moment is exactly why this matters. Because on modern cars, the most expensive-looking problems are very often caused by the cheapest, most ignored part under the hood. Here is the uncomfortable truth most owners never hear. The majority of oil leaks, rough idles, and even some "the engine is burning oil" diagnoses on otherwise healthy engines do not come from worn seals or tired motors. They come from a tiny one-way valve quietly failing somewhere on top of the engine, and the failure of that valve creates pressure and symptoms everywhere else. The seals get blamed, the gaskets get blamed, the engine itself gets blamed. But the part that actually failed is the one nobody checked, because checking it doesn't sell a job. Let me explain what this part actually does, because once you understand it, you'll never look at an oil leak the same way again. Every time your engine fires, a small amount of combustion pressure slips past the piston rings into the crankcase, the lower part of the engine where the oil lives. This is completely normal. Engineers have known about it for over a century. It's called blow-by, and those gases are nasty, unburned fuel vapor, moisture, and acidic byproducts. If you let them sit in the crankcase, they turn your oil into sludge and eat your engine from the inside. So every modern engine has a system to vent those gases out of the crankcase and route them back into the intake to be burned off cleanly. The traffic cop for that entire system is one small, spring-loaded valve. On most engines, it's a cheap plastic or metal valve that pushes or threads into the valve cover, and it costs almost nothing. The major suppliers make them for a handful of dollars. That valve is constantly modulating. At idle, when engine vacuum is high, it restricts flow so it doesn't lean out your idle. Under load, when vacuum drops, it opens up to let more gases through. It's not glamorous. It's a plunger and a spring. But it controls the pressure balance of your entire engine, and when it sticks, the consequences ripple outward in ways that look terrifying and expensive. Think about it like a pressure relief valve on a water heater. When it works, you never think about it. When it seizes shut, pressure builds with nowhere to go, and the weakest point in the system gives way. On an engine, the weakest points are your seals and gaskets. When that little valve sticks closed, the blow-by gases have no exit. Pressure builds inside the crankcase, and that pressure has to escape somewhere. So it pushes oil out past the valve cover gasket. It pushes oil past the front and rear crankshaft seals. On a bad day, it will push your dipstick halfway out of the tube. Suddenly, your car is leaving spots on the driveway, and the obvious diagnosis, the one that gets written on the estimate, is leaking gaskets and seals. So the shop quotes you to replace those gaskets and seals. $400 to start. And here is the trap. If they replace the gaskets but never replace the $6 valve, the pressure is still there. The new gaskets start weeping too, often within months, and now you are convinced your engine is just old and tired. The other way it fails is the opposite, and it is just as misunderstood. Sometimes the valve sticks open or its spring gives out. Now there is too much flow, and that becomes a vacuum leak. Your car's computer sees extra air sneaking in, the air-fuel mixture goes lean, and the idle starts to hunt, surge, or shake. You might get a lean code, the kind that sends people chasing oxygen sensors, mass airflow sensors, and intake gaskets, hundreds of dollars in parts, when the actual cause was a $1 spring inside a $6 valve. This is the part that makes the whole thing so frustrating. The symptoms point everywhere except at the cause. A stuck valve can mimic a blown rear main seal, a failing oxygen sensor, a leaking intake gasket, a tired engine burning oil, even early sludge problems, because when the crankcase cannot breathe, moisture and fuel vapor stay trapped in your oil and start cooking into deposits. One small failure wearing a dozen different masks. Now here's the uncomfortable part for the industry. None of this is hidden knowledge. Any competent technician knows what this valve does, but checking it does not generate revenue. There is no labor to bill on a 2-minute inspection. There is no impressive part to put on the invoice. A $6 valve and a shake test does not justify a service write-up. A valve cover gasket job does. A seal replacement does. Diagnostic fees and smoke tests do. So the cheap fix that solves the problem gets skipped, and the expensive repair that treats the symptom gets sold. I am not telling you every mechanic is dishonest. Most are not. But the incentives of the business reward replacing big things, not checking small ones, and that bias quietly costs drivers real money every single day. And it is made worse by the maintenance schedules. Decades ago, this valve was a routine tune-up item. You replaced it without thinking, like a filter. Somewhere along the way, it quietly fell off most service schedules. So now you have cars with 120,000 miles, 180,000 miles, even 250,000 miles on the clock, running the original valve from the factory. A cheap plastic part full of springs and a plunger, baked by heat and coated in oil residue for the entire life of the vehicle. Nobody ever told the owner it existed. Nobody ever checked it. And then one day the engine starts leaking, and everyone assumes the worst. Here is how you check it yourself, and it costs you nothing. On most 4 cylinders and many V6s, the valve sits right on the valve cover, sometimes with a hose clamped to it, sometimes threaded in. Find it, pull it out, and shake it. A healthy valve rattles. That rattle is the plunger moving freely inside, which is exactly what it is supposed to do. If it is silent, if the plunger is stuck or gummed solid, that valve is done, and it has very likely been quietly building pressure in your engine for a long time. You can also feel for it. With the engine idling, a working valve will have a steady hiss of vacuum if you cover the opening with your finger and feel it pulse. No vacuum, or a wildly inconsistent one, tells the same story. This is a 5-minute check that I have watched solve $400 problems more times than I can tell you. Replacing it is just as simple on most cars. Let the engine cool, locate the valve, pop or unthread the old one, and install the new one. Use a quality name brand valve, and this is the one place I will be firm with you, because the cheapest no-name valves often have weak springs or wrong flow rates that recreate the exact problem you are trying to fix. This is a part where spending $8 on the right one instead of $3 on the wrong one actually matters. Snug it down, do not over-tighten the plastic, and you are done. Most people can do this in their own driveway in less time than it takes to drive to the parts store. But I want to be honest with you the same way I'd be honest with someone standing in my bay, because this part is not magic, and treating it like a miracle cure is how people get burned. If your car has a genuinely blown rear main seal that's been leaking for years, a fresh valve won't reverse that damage. If your engine truly burns oil from worn piston rings, which is a real and known issue on plenty of high-mileage engines, this valve isn't going to rebuild your motor. What checking and replacing this valve does is separate the cheap, common cause from the expensive, rare one before you spend a dime. If you replace the valve and the leak stops and the idle smooths out, you just saved yourself hundreds and possibly thousands of dollars. If you replace it and the problem remains, you've lost $6 and 10 minutes, and you've gained something far more valuable: certainty that the problem is real and worth fixing properly. That alone puts you ahead of nearly every driver who ever handed a shop a blank check out of fear. And prevention here is almost insultingly simple. Pull that valve and shake it once a year, maybe when you change your oil. If it does not rattle freely, replace it. On a high-mileage car, just replacing it every 50,000 miles or so as cheap insurance is one of the smartest things you can do, because the part costs nothing and the damage it prevents costs everything. Keep your oil changes regular too, because dirty oil and the sludge from a poorly ventilated crankcase are what gum these valves up in the first place. It is a quiet little maintenance loop. A clean engine keeps the valve healthy, and a healthy valve keeps the engine clean. This is the mindset shift I want you to walk away with. On a modern car, an oil leak is not automatically a death sentence, and a rough idle is not automatically a major repair. More often than not, these are pressure and breathing problems traced back to one small, forgotten valve that costs less than your morning coffee. The reason these problems feel so expensive is not because the fix is expensive. It is because the cheap fix is invisible, sitting in plain sight on top of your engine, behind a wall of estimates for the seals and gaskets it quietly destroyed. The owner of that SUV drove away that evening with a dry driveway and a smooth idle, having spent $6 instead of $400, and the only thing that changed was that someone finally checked the part nobody checks. So before you authorize a single seal, before you believe your engine is finally wearing out, before you hand over your card for a job that treats the symptom, do this first. Find that valve, pull it, shake it, and listen. The cheapest part under your hood is often the loudest clue. If this changed the way you think about oil leaks, hit that like button so more drivers see it before they get a $400 quote. Subscribe if you want weekly breakdowns that hand you control instead of fear. And if you have ever fixed a problem with a part this cheap that a shop wanted to charge you a fortune for, tell me about it in the comments, because the most expensive repair on any car is never the one under the hood. It is the one you pay for because nobody told you where to look or to